Welcome to Rakbank SME Souk podcast. I'm Thomas Baxendale, Head of Digital for Business Banking. Join us as we talk about all things tax on today's episode of SME Souk. Today we're joined by a true tax heavyweight, Thomas Vanhee, founding partner of the award-winning boutique Aurifer Tax. Thomas's company spans the GCC, when he broke away from a Tier 1 firm to guide businesses across the UAE across the fast-moving VAT and corporate tax maze. Well, Thomas, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I guess we ask the same question on each episode. We ask our guests to tell us about the journey that they've undertaken to come to this wonderful place that is the UAE. So what was your journey?
Sure. In a nutshell, I came around 8.5 years ago when the UAE was largely a tax-free environment. And as a tax advisor, when it became an environment where taxes would apply, excise tax, VAT, and eventually corporate income tax, it was a greenfield, let's say, for me to come and help not just UAE, but also Saudi Arabia and then the broader region, really.
And you were in Europe before you came here.
Yeah.
What was it like transitioning from a European environment to Dubai?
Well, obviously, the environments where I worked in, which was both Belgium and France, are quite mature from a tax point of view. And I think that's also why there was a benefit of bringing people from mature environments here. They know what the tax authority, what taxpayers have been through. So that experience was quite relevant. I will admit that when I was initially seconded to Dubai, I was supposed to come for 2 years, as with many people, right? And then you stick around. But when I was seconded, I was not necessarily very much looking forward to it. And the reason why was I had visited Dubai in 2013 or 2014, and I didn't like it.
Really?
I didn't like it at the time.
Can we ask why?
I thought at the time, I was trying to wrap my head around expensive real estate at the time.
Okay.
And I was like, how come with all of this desert and all of this potential, plots of land, how come the real estate is so high? I mean, it's a small anecdote really, but,
well, it's a lot higher now
yeah,
than it was in 2013.
I looked at things and I was like, oh, I'm not sure if this city is really for me. And then when I eventually moved here in 2017, initially with the view of going back after 2 years, I really found the environment very pleasant from, both from a personal and from a business perspective. So, then fast forward 8.5 years, and there's no sign of me leaving anytime just yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating how that happens, right? So
Yeah.
I'm coming up to 11 years. And we went through that same cycle.
Yeah.
3 years, and then we'll go home. And then I've gone through multiple rounds of 3 years in that same time. So I guess you've set up an award-winning boutique tax company here in the UAE, and you're expanding as well. What are some of your highs and lows from that experience of bringing the company up?
It's a very interesting question, right? And many people ask me because they view sometimes I might view an opportunity in the market, so they'll ask me how I did it. If you look in the market, we're the single biggest privately held entity that provides these services. There's nobody like us. Everybody else that was either already a big brand or has set up using a foreign big brand. So we're completely homegrown, and that has its own challenges because you think when you work in a large organization that you are doing a lot of the selling, a lot of the signing of the contracts, and that's due to you because you're very handsome and very intelligent. And once you step out of that, it's a very grounding experience. It's a humbling experience because you tell people I'm the same person, and then you initially struggle to think why are they thinking about this a couple of times. How come they're taking their time? Now that stage of our firm, we've largely left that behind. We're an established brand these days. But the kind of the biggest thing, and you can ask any kind of entrepreneur really what their biggest struggle is or attention point is cash flow.
Yeah.
In a growing business, and we were not a business that wanted to say we're going to be 2 people and we're going to be servicing the market as 2 people. We wanted to grow. Your point from going from 2 persons to 3 persons means you need 50% more cash coming in to pay that person. And I'm largely simplifying, obviously, but I remember a couple of months into our journey where at some point I knew I had invoices outstanding. And your first and foremost priority, at least for me, is always payroll. Right? Because in a services business, your people are your inventory, so you need to keep them very happy, and paying their salaries is the bare minimum that you should be doing, right? But if you miss that, right, that is a big thing. We never missed it, but we came to a point where it was 5 years before the end of the month. And I knew money should be coming in, but it wasn't coming in. So at some point, what do you do at that point? You call a friend, you call a family member.
To bridge that gap.
Yeah. And you say, if need be, can you help me? Right. And lo and behold, the next day the money came in and I never needed to help. But being in that spot compared to being an employee before, where your salary every month just kind of, drops on your bank account, and you maybe start spending or maybe start repaying your credit cards, that it's a completely different dynamic. And maybe to close off on that, for me personally, I didn't have the same equivalent salary that I had when I left my previous job in my own firm for at least 2.5 years. And that's something that you make up for it largely after, but you really need to get through that initial 2 to 3 years. And if you do, then it's a bit more cruising speed. But the initial period is very tough.
Yeah, and I guess when you're in that startup or growth stage of your company, I think statistics point to 90% of companies shutter their doors between years 1 and 2, largely because of cash flow problems.
Yeah.
Ill management of finances and tax, and we'll come on to that, but largely due to the cash flow. It's very difficult. It seems very attractive to go, I want to be my own boss. I've got my own idea. I want to go and build my own company and follow that dream. But then getting from that to a paying customer and then paying all of those expenses that you've incurred trying to get the thing up and running is an incredibly difficult journey.
Yeah.
So then why the UAE? You could have gone to North America. You could have gone to Asia. You could have gone anywhere.
Yeah.
Of your choosing. Obviously, you're a very capable person and you could set up your company anywhere, and you're expanding to different reasons in the GCC. Why the UAE?
So when we set up, I consciously wanted to make the choice to focus on the GCC, right? So the UAE was the first port of call because it's easier to set up a company, it's faster, less red tape and whatnot. We very quickly set up an entity as well in Saudi Arabia, later on in Abu Dhabi, still in the UAE, and then in Qatar as well. I think out of all of those countries, the UAE has the best business environment. That's not just, reading statistics and whatnot. The UAE, super well connected. Everybody wants to come here to do business. There's obviously some capital present with the governments as well that can deploy that on certain projects. So I think for me, it wasn't too difficult of a choice, right? It was also linked with my expertise, really, because, the momentum was there. And that momentum was specifically in 2017, excise tax in Saudi Arabia and in the UAE, VAT on the 1st of January 2018. Then smaller incremental reforms. And then the bigger one was in 2022 when the UAE announced the introduction of corporate income tax. And all of those journeys are, what's important in our business is when there's a regulatory change, it usually requires assistance, advice. It requires filing of returns and whatnot. And all of those are things that we do on behalf of our clients.
You're right. And so we run webinars for our customers on a regular basis. And usually the ones revolving around tax or the tax environment are the most well attended. You wouldn't think so from the subject matter, but they are. Every single time they're oversubscribed. Why do you think it's such an important point for small businesses to understand that, particularly in the UAE environment?
I think it's important to understand for everyone, right? But then I think the UAE has historically led with its proposition to be tax-free, right? And that is not entirely the case anymore, but it's still a very, very beneficial regime.
Yeah.
The reason why I think simply for businesses it's important is because it is a cost in the end, right? Your profit after tax is no longer the same as the profit before tax, simply put. And then I think obviously a lot of people, they want to launch businesses. They want to understand how it impacts them. That's one segment. There's the natural persons that are moving here, that are claiming tax residency here. How does that relate to their home country and whatnot? So there's many of those questions. It is a bit of a dry one, but it is a very important one.
No, incredibly. And so our audience is largely startups and fintechs and small businesses that are setting up in the UAE. Can you just give a brief understanding of what the tax environment is like for small businesses today? Maybe some of the things that are changing or on the horizon to change.
Sure, yeah. I think probably first off, good to understand that we are an SME, but largely our clients are not SMEs. They're large corporates. We do have the odd fintech and whatnot, and the rules are the same for large businesses and for small businesses, with a couple of exceptions. You have something called small business relief up until 3 million dirhams, and that runs up until the end of 2026.
Okay.
So that's one rule specifically for them. There's another rule which specifically applies to very large businesses, which is the so-called global minimum tax. The last couple of days there was news on that because the US and the G7 have agreed on specific rules on that, largely not applicable to SMEs. I wish it to them because it means they've done incredibly successful and grown a lot. I think where it is probably important for small businesses is when they're privately held. The dynamic is a bit different, right? Say founder-led or privately held. There is a concept that we use of connected persons, and that is a concept embedded in the legislation, which says that when there's a payment or benefit granted to a shareholder, a director, or an officer of the business, that payment needs to be done at arm's length. What does that mean is it means what you are paying yourself as the owner should be what you would be earning with a company that you don't own.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
Let's say open market conditions, right? But that's it. While the concept is easy, the application might not be.
I imagine
right?
so.
Because it's a bit
emptying the coffers to pay my salary.
Correct, right? So and that's exactly why it was implemented, because you could significantly reduce the tax base when you pay yourself a salary,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
And that's a limitation to what you can do there, but that limitation is not it's not a black and white thing. So,
no, of course.
So that's, for example, typically something that you look at with small businesses that are privately held or founder led. For the small businesses, I would say usually you don't face too much complexity from a tax point of view, which is also why they usually don't really get in touch with us, right? If you're a small business only operating in the UAE, you won't need us. You need a good accountant. For those small businesses, the good accountant and the good accounting software is largely what you need. And that's, helps you in take your mind off of what is your business, right? You need to run your business, not the tax. We always say, and I think it's important as well, is that the business drives the tax doesn't drive the business.
Okay, so one of the main questions that we receive at Rakbank when we're setting up businesses for companies is, where should I set my company up? Should it be in a free zone? Should it be in mainland? Could you just go into a bit of detail on what the differences are?
Sure. It's a bit the $1 million question, really, or it's one of the questions that we also get asked more frequently. I think there's two dimensions. There's the administrative and the legal dimension, which we don't advise on, but we would know, and people generally know, that most of the free zones, the admin piece is a bit easier than in the mainland. Obviously, the legal side of things, whether you can hold 100% or not, you would know that in the UAE historically there was a 51-49 limitation that was changed a couple of years ago. Except for certain sectors, right? So there's that dynamic, which I think is important to look at for businesses. when it then comes to the tax piece, probably the most common myth is I will incorporate in a free zone and I'm going to be subject to 0% corporate income tax, right? The very important nuance is that is that there's a range of conditions that apply. And if you don't fulfill all of those conditions, then you just fall back on the mainland regime and you're subject to 9% corporate tax.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for example, the list of activities that can qualify for the 0% is a list, and so in its essence, it is limited. The types of qualifying activities are perhaps more limited than one would expect. So I think it's important for businesses that go and set up in these mainland entities, really, that they try and see it, look at that list. For example, consulting services is not on the list, right? Okay. Legal services is not, administrative services, accounting services is not on that list. And they may still be subject to a 0% corporate income tax, but for those specific types of activities, it would require that almost all of their income is only free zone to free zone.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think the what is special about the way in which the UAE has set up its system is free zone to free zone is subject to 0% with certain exclusions, but free zone to mainland and free zone to third countries, your activity needs to be on that list of qualifying activities. And the expectation would normally be with, let's say, a free zone in other places is that you are trying to create a place for investment that does business with everyone around the world. So you would generally expect that when you do business with a third country outside of the UAE, that would still qualify, and be subject to 0%. But that's not the choice that the UAE has taken. That is not to say that it's not an attractive regime for holding companies, for example, for headquarters, for financing treasury activities. It's a very beneficial regime. But if you're an SME, then your mom and pop shop or your restaurants or anything that is has to do with sales B2C just simply doesn't qualify.
Yeah.
And so that's probably an important thing, because if you don't have the tax benefit, right, then mainland and free zone are the same. So then it's other factors that will drive your choice.
Yeah, I mean, so in summary, it's incredibly complicated, right?
It is.
Where it's a consistent pain point for our businesses, trying to figure out where they should set up, which free zone, which entity. Should I go in Ras Al Khaimah? Should I go in Fujairah? Should I come into Dubai or Abu Dhabi? Where can businesses get information, that sort of the real clarity of information, so that they can make that decision straight off the bat, so they're not setting up incorrectly?
I think you're asking the wrong guy.
Maybe it's an advisory service you could boot up.
Who knows? But no, I think I think that landscape is very dynamic, and even for us as well, it's hard to follow, right? Largely, the free zones that we deal with are DIFC and ADGM, JAFSA, DMCC, a bit more of the bigger, more mature ones. Beyond that, there's a whole range of them, right? It's a full-time job to keep on top of all of these developments, but unfortunately, it's not our full-time job.
No, it's fine. I was just trying to get a little bit of information on because there are 52 free zones in the UAE. So from a Rakbank perspective, we have to keep an eye on that ecosystem. Yeah. We also have, from my personal perspective, we have to digitally connect to those free zones, the ones that are providing a really good service to our customers. We want to digitally integrate with those as well. But it's something that consistently comes up whenever we speak to customers. Corporate tax countdown.
Probably good for you to know is that it's on a rolling basis, so it's 9 months after the end of the financial year. I think the first point, the starting point, is the financial statements. Yep. The UAE has had to evolve a bit in its environment. The reason why I say that is there is a segment of businesses that don't have financial statements because they didn't require them from a regulatory point of view, because they didn't require them from a legal point of view, or because perhaps they didn't want them, or because the free zone where they were established didn't require them, right? And they were subject to an exemption. today, if you want to claim the free zone exemption, you are required to have financial statements, audited financial statements, I must add. And if your turnover is above 50 million dirhams, you're also required to have audited financial statements.
Sure.
And that means that many, many more businesses are required now to have financial statements compared to before. And the first step in trying to calculate your corporate income tax is taking your accounting profits. And your accounting profits, we take those from the financial statements. So what we currently see is many businesses are a bit late in finalizing those financial statements.
Okay.
There's a lot of work pressure on the auditors. We've recently also opened an audit department to help our clients with that same objective. So that's really step number one. We finalize the numbers from an accounting point of view. Then we take those numbers, and we would normally go ahead and calculate all of the numbers for the tax return. And that involves in year one a number of elections, and they're called technically a number of choices. Those choices, they relate to transitional provisions because it's the first year. Right. What you can do is for certain financial assets, intangible assets, but also very importantly, immovable property, you can lock out earlier gains. Right. And I would highly advise businesses to look into that if they have any of those assets.
Okay.
The second thing to elect is something which is much less exciting, which is around something called the realization principle for accounting purposes that might swing your profits up or down. The main thing, though, to look at is it's not just the calculation. Really, it is a bit of a good opportunity to look at things. So we were talking about founder-led or privately held businesses earlier. We see many businesses where the business owners have used the business a bit like their own cash.
Sure.
Right. And that's
more of an account rather
exactly.
than,
And now's the moment to clean that up because we need to justify what those payments are, right? Equally, let's say that you've got bad debts. Now's the time really to look at those receivables and take a provision or write them off. Really, so there's a lot of cleanup to be done.
Sure.
There, together with, are we registered in the right way? Should we be tax grouping if we've got multiple entities? So there's actually quite a bit of work to be done before we get to the point of the filing, really.
Yeah, no, understandably. And how much does software come into this? So there's obviously accounting software packages that you take from Xero, Zoho, QuickBooks.
Yeah.
And you can allocate these payments to different categories, and that sort of helps out. How much do you see your customers using these kinds of software packages, and how useful are they for the corporate tax return?
Yeah. If you don't use an accounting software, you're really living in the last century. I think they're of huge importance, and they are improving every day. Their use for the corporate income tax return is fairly good. That is not to say when your entity or your operations are more complex, they might not always be suitable, right?
Sure.
So usually the accounting softwares, they do most of the work well, but a small proportion of more complex matters they don't do well. So you need to have workarounds, or you need to understand what are the limitations of the software. But they are very important, increasing every day in quality and in the way that they handle data. So they're crucial. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a company in the UK that rents out property, a couple of properties that we have back in the UK. And we use Xero for the accounting package for that. In the UAE, can you auto file your tax return yet? Or is that something that's coming? Because with HMRC, you can auto file and the whole thing's automatic.
Yeah, you can't just yet. It's something that the Federal Tax Authority will be looking at eventually, right? Today, there's not enough softwares on the market that actually do the whole return. There is, for corporate tax purposes, no direct link with the Federal Tax Authority.
Okay.
There is now for VAT purposes. So that's a really, really good first step, because it clarifies kind of the information channels between the two. So that's something to be done still. Yeah, I'd say the next bit on the horizon is e-invoicing, which is going to become mandatory as from
I saw
mid
you wrote
next
a
year.
blog post on your company's website.
Okay.
About e-invoicing.
Oh, did we?
Well, it's clearly not you writing them now.
It's a very, very important thing on the horizon really for businesses, and I think we're going quite fast as the UAE with all of these changes, but they are for the better, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's interesting you point that out. We're launching our e-invoicing feature functionality very soon for Rakbank Business Banking customers. You're able to send a link on whatever communication platform you want, and the customer can see that invoice and pay it directly.
Yeah.
So it's very, very useful tools to help small businesses.
It could be incredibly powerful, right? And I'm a huge fan of it. I do think that e-invoicing, with time, we're probably going to be looking 10 years from now at different types of tools. But I think in terms of like operational efficiency and whatnot, I think it'll help much. I am always surprised when a client tells me, and it doesn't happen much, maybe once a year, when I send an invoice, they say, please come and pick up the check. It's like, okay. Could you do a bank transfer? Really, it's a bit the equivalent of that. That's reducing the use of checks and being replaced with more efficient ways of making payments, really. And I think that's a bit what we're evolving.
It's funny. So we have a very progressive central bank who are looking to digitize and looking to come off the whole check system. But it's so funny, when I came to the UAE and I was signing my checks for my first rental apartment, I'd never signed a check before.
Yeah.
Coming from the UK, I'd never, just no need to do one.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the same thing for me. I'd seen it once when I was a kid. My mom, I don't even remember why, but at one point she'd written a check and I was like, okay, what is this? The other one that I've learned recently is the cancel check. Oh, yeah? I was completely unaware. It's something which is much in use in India, apparently, to justify that you're effectively the company that will be receiving the payment. I wasn't aware of that practice either. Yeah.
So we just talked about tools and software applications. What about the main talking point of the moment, AI? How is AI going to disrupt or enhance your industry?
Yeah, I've always been a bit of a skeptic when it came to let's say IT vendors coming to promote certain types of services and whatnot, and it's probably because,
haven't we all?
Sorry,
haven't we all?
Yeah, haven't we? And it probably has to do with my sleepless night when 1999 turned into 2000 and all of the IT vendors were scaring us about Y2K and the virus and planes were going to fall out of the sky and it was going to be mayhem all over the world. And then, you wake up the next day and birds are chirping and everything's fine. And I feel like sometimes when it comes to certain concepts, such as, let's say, automation or machine learning, they're a bit, concepts that existed but that have received a different name now. But I do believe that with AI, we are talking about something which is justifiably going to add a lot to any business. Really, the amount of use cases is just phenomenal. When it comes to us, for example, specifically, there's a number of aspects that we need to consider. Number one is client confidentiality. So we don't use it for client confidential matters. Now, the way in which it is going to make our type of work evolve a lot is, for example, reconciliations are much easier, much quicker to do. When it comes to, let's say, drafting policies or drafting, our clients very often ask us to draft a memo for them, right? So that goes quicker. If you want to have a memo reviewed, that goes quicker. If you go back to the accounting softwares and whatnot, predictive analysis of your current business is much easier with the use of AI. And I still think that we're a bit we're not really at the start, but we're somewhere midway.
Yeah.
I feel that's kind of a bit my conviction. There's going to be many, many more applications coming out, which are going to be really, helping us day to day in our work. I think if you come from a consulting background, it is going to be very disruptive.
Or very lucrative if you're in the consulting world.
If you can keep your fee level.
No, it's interesting you say that, because I can't remember where I was reading it, but it feels like we're at the beginning, sort of in the beginning stages of the .com boom, right?
Yeah.
It's the internet.
Yeah.
Websites are being popped up, but Amazon didn't exist yet. The technology was there. There was no business model.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think we're at the stage now where people are experimenting left, right, and center. There's loads of stuff coming out. We don't know which direction it's going to go.
Yeah.
But there will be a winner. There will be 3 or 4 winners that don't exist today.
Yeah.
And they may or may not be large corporates that exist, the Googles and the Amazons of the world. But I think we're very much there. But with the pace that it's going, I think it will happen in the next 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, I think the other comparison that you could make is, when Google was launched, right? We had the internet, then what are the use cases, right? And then Google, how fast was information accessible, right? So some people who use AI as a kind of an improved Google, for which it does a good job, right? But there's then so many other use cases really where it almost leads you to an existential crisis around, like, why did I go to university for so long? And I think that's really one to watch, including in our profession, but in any profession, I really believe so.
Yeah, no, education, the impacts of AI are massive. In an environment where you don't really need to know how to work something out on your own. Trigonometry, good example.
Yeah.
I had school teachers saying, this fancy calculator that you've now bought, you need to learn it in your head because you might not have a calculator with you at all points in time. Now I have the same calculator in my car.
Yeah.
Like, the difference between that level of technology and what we've got at our fingertips now is phenomenal. No, I've started very much using, the AI platforms as a replacement for Google. I very rarely go into Google now.
Yeah.
I'm starting to search for it for localized things, like find me a doctor here, or find me a pet shop over here, or for my son's school, like analyze the schools in the region, tell me which ones are the best. So it's it's phenomenal. And the variances between the different platforms are quite large. So you get different responses, but it's becoming very, very accurate. And as a source of somewhere to go to get some recommendations, I think that is going to significantly increase over the next few years.
Yeah. The one to watch probably is, Google has its ad revenue, right? We don't really have ads on most AI applications. I don't know how they will find a way around that, but I would imagine that the Googles and whatnot, they're looking at their ad revenue, and that's substantially decreasing as a result.
Yeah, and for the first time last week before, I saw a company. I think they messaged me directly saying that they did search engine optimization, but for the AI platforms.
Okay.
So if you're searching for a doctor, how do I make sure that I'm ChatGPT is saying, "Hey, go see this doctor"?
All right. Okay. That's interesting.
It's just completely new wave
business.
Yeah. It's phenomenal. Okay. So we ask all of our guests for a prediction. And what is their view of what things are going to come and impact the businesses in the UAE over the next year or so, 2 years? What's your prediction for SMEs in the UAE?
Crystal balling is always a bit tricky.
We won't hold you to it, don't worry.
Yeah, I'll tell you what the most common question is that we get asked, and it again relates to tax and notably on personal income tax. People always ask us, is we've had VAT, corporate income taxes, personal income tax going to come in as well? One aspect of what we refer to as the corporate income tax law actually applies to natural persons. So a better term for it is a business tax. But beyond that, let's say if you're an employee and whatnot, and you've moved to the UAE or to any GCC country except for Oman, for that matter, Oman implementing personal income taxes from 2028.
And scared everybody.
And scares everybody. Now it's on higher salaries.
Sure.
Nonetheless, for expats, they would largely fall into scope. So the question that we often get is, what is the UAE going to do? nobody reads the boring kind of IMF reports about the UAE, but actually they are an incredibly good predictor of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the introduction of personal income tax in Oman was a IMF recommendation.
Really?
Absolutely.
I'm going to set up a little notification
Yeah.
to read these reports.
Exactly. In the same way as the introduction of VAT in 4 out of the 6 GCC countries was an IMF recommendation. Corporate income tax was not necessarily a direct recommendation in the UAE. I'm slightly digressing, but so personal income tax in the UAE, not on the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And the fiscal reforms that the UAE went through actually provide enough of a fiscal buffer for the UAE as a country to not be in a fiscal situation where they need income from personal income tax. At a federal level, the UAE has been running a surplus, so they don't need money. It's incredibly positive when compared to most other countries around the world.
It shows that the diversification of their ecosystem has worked, right?
Yeah.
So going into tourism, massive boom in real estate, education, schooling, all of that has provided a great place for people to come and live and to build their lives in perpetuity. And they perhaps don't need to use this lever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Some of it also goes hand in hand with the way in which the state is organized. So it's a federal state, but with large autonomy for each emirate. So the federal budget is not big. Now, the individual emirates most of them are also quite well off in terms of their financial situation. So they share the revenue from excise tax, from VAT, and from corporate income tax. So there's in the short and medium run really absolutely no need fiscally to introduce personal income tax. There's also no broader policy push on the horizon, whether that's OECD or the EU, to introduce something like this. Right? So the introduction of corporate income tax was largely a response to discussions at the G20, OECD, and EU level around the global minimum tax, and that's how we got there.
Yeah.
But there's nothing on the horizon like that for natural persons, except for something called a global minimum wealth tax, but which is really for the very, very affluent. So.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, I sincerely hope you'll be in scope one day, and everybody. But yeah, so there's nothing on the horizon really. So I think people that have moved in part to the UAE or to any GCC country for the absence of personal income tax, right, which it is obviously a very important factor. Your spending power increases substantially when you do. There's no threat to that on the horizon really.
Oof, so we can all rest easy.
Yeah, we can all retire maybe.
Well, that's the next phase.
Point, yeah.
Look, Thomas, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.